The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
We're going to get right into it. Obviously, the big story over the weekend, the shooting at Newtown, Connecticut Sandy Hook School. 28 dead, 20 children, 6 adults, the shooter and the shooter's mother. Now, I have some big problems with the media coverage that's been going on.
The brother.
The mother.
Well, the brother was also shot.
No, the brother was not shot. That was one of the wrong early reports. The brother was fine. He was talked to.
Really?
Lewis apparently way behind on this story.
I am.
Welcome to the David Pakman Show. Big story over the weekend, the shooting at Newtown, Connecticut Sandy Hook School. 28 dead, 20 kids, 6 adults, the shooter and the shooter's mother. Part of the problem I've been having with the media coverage, Lewis, is this, well, we're going to get into it, but this anti-hero status of the shooter. So I'm going to mention his name once now, and that's it. His name was Adam Lanza, 20-year-old male. Now, multiple guns were used. They were owned by the shooter's mother. Reports now coming out that the shooter's mother feared that her son was, quote, getting worse, and allegedly told a friend that he, quote, was burning himself with a lighter. This is also another aspect of the media coverage that I have a problem with. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Friends also saying the mother was believed that the world was on the edge of collapse, profiled her as a kind of survivalist, stockpiling food, water, guns, and it was those guns that eventually led to the death of 28 individuals. Very protective mother, insisted that her son never be left on his own, never go out by himself. A lot of details starting to emerge, initially a lot of incorrect details, but I want to focus really on the media coverage, because I think that there have been so many problems with this media coverage, and I want to start from the top of the list. Number one, the way that mainstream corporate media obsessive over the victim, I believe, creates this almost anti-hero status. I mean, think about the number of hours of television now that have gone into every detail about this individual's life. When else do you get that amount of coverage? Mitt Romney got some one-hour specials when he was running for president against President Obama, right? I mean, it takes a lot on the non-criminal side to get this level of attention, and I think it's a negative thing. I think it's the wrong way. Fine, mention the shooter's name, and let's move on from every aspect of his life. And I understand the need to try to look at, well, what led to this type of thing, but I think there's many more important things than the specific motive in this case, and it's creating almost like a hero out of the guy.
I don't think it's a bad thing to talk about the shooter and why he had the state of mind he did, what led to this. There's a lot of things you could talk about, and I don't think this is bad to talk about. It's one of the many things that you could talk about. I mean, I don't know if we can criticize media outlets for talking about this, considering that this is something that people find really interesting and want to hear more about.
Well, but that's the thing. I think we need responsibility over what people find interesting. What people find interesting is coded word for ratings, and I understand it's all about ratings and making money. I do get that, but I believe that we're getting to irresponsible media coverage. Another aspect of this, the constant recreations of the crime. I turn on CNN at one point. They've got a Google satellite view of the school, and they're using multiple colors to draw where different people walked through the halls and where what shots were fired. Again, I understand ratings, but is that necessary, or is that only going to give more people this kind of ideation about what they want to do here in Natan? I mean, am I way off on this?
I don't know. I mean, I don't really think that they're making the killer out to be a hero or making people think that he was in any way justified in that sense. But I know that you're not saying that specifically, but I don't think the anti-hero thing is what I have a problem with. My main problem is that we talk about the psychology of the killer as an individual, not about the social forces at work that make a lot of people end up in the same state of mind as the killer. And then separately, which I know we're going to talk about later, the fact that gun control isn't adequately discussed by anyone.
Okay, we'll get to that. Let's continue through the other things that I think were horrible. The constant reporting of little details, like how many times each child was shot and specifically where. Again, it's data. I understand it's data. But what is good about putting that information out there? I just don't get it. What's productive about that?
I agree with you there. Along with the recreations of the shooting, I don't see how that information does anything for anyone other than the people investigating the crime. and the people who have to draw up plans for schools in emergency situations like this where they can reference that data.
Right. And also the interviews of the little kids, asking little children, did you hear gunshots? How many gunshots did you hear? I find, and maybe that's not so much about the kids. I'm not blaming the kids. It's presumably the parents who allowed that interview, and also the journalists who are out there really trying to convince the parents, because they're doing a good sell job on let me interview your kid on the air. I'll handle them with kid gloves. I have a huge problem with that.
Yeah, also seems pretty pointless.
The gun control discussion that we talked about. The gun control discussion is extremely important in these cases. And every time this happens, right away we hear from some people, this is not the right time to talk about this. That's a garbage statement. It's always the right time to talk about this, particularly in these cases. But if you are to believe that we shouldn't be talking about it just after one of these incidents, when would we talk about it? We're constantly only a few weeks or months removed from one of these incidents. That's the problem. That's why we need to talk about it.
Yes, and I think obviously we talk about gun control a lot, and
Yeah.
I am in favor of stricter gun control, but I think this is one of those situations where gun control was not the answer.
In this particular case?
Yes.
I disagree with you. I disagree with you because, fine, the mother had multiple weapons, but it appears, and I guess we know this because of that same media coverage I'm criticizing, so maybe I'm being hypocritical here, but we know this because most of these deaths were caused with the semi-automatic large weapon, okay? So again, if this was a handgun that had to be reloaded after 8 shots, we do have a very different situation. Yes. So I think it is a factor here.
I agree. It's a factor, but I don't think it's the biggest factor.
Well, let's get to the other factor.
Yes.
The other factor is the mental health discussion is often not had because of the gun discussion, and the gun discussion is often not had because it gets wrapped up into politics and the Second Amendment and the NRA. But it gets us to the mental health discussion. And I'm not talking about specifically the psychoanalysis of this individual shooter. I want to be clear. I am not talking about that. I'm talking about the broader discussion that for $250, it's pretty easy to go and get a gun. And most people have no idea. Well, how do I get mental health services? Most people aren't really directed by family because of their own stigmas or societal pressure to tell someone to seek mental health, or because they themselves need mental health and they can't mental health help, and they can't identify that their friend or loved one also needs it. And the stigma associated with seeking out that type of help, that broadly is not really being discussed in a ton.
No, it's not. I mean, there are a lot of things that we could very easily do, and I don't mean they're easy politically, but they're easy from a policy perspective in terms of what it would accomplish. The high magazine rounds for handguns and also assault weapons.
No question.
I would say that assault weapons should be banned, period, and not just reinstating the 94 ban. I mean making it even more severe in what it bans. And then separately, there are other tangential things that can be done, like having a waiting period when you want to buy a gun,
right,
where you rethink it. A lot of people are hot; they're emotionally hot when they want to buy a gun, and they sort of cool off if you have them wait a couple weeks.
Well, Lewis, reports are that on Tuesday the shooter tried to get a gun and wasn't able to. Fortunately, even that waiting period did delay the shooting 3 days, right? So we have to assume if you have a 14 to 28 day waiting period and more extensive regulation, you are going to affect the numbers of these shootings and the severity.
Right, and I agree. I'm all for an assault weapons ban and heavier restrictions on magazine sizes. But, I mean, clearly there are some red flags here when it comes to mental health. I think it's natural for parents to be in denial about things like that. I mean, I don't want to start a witch hunt here and, have millions of parents sending their children to electroshock therapy, but you need to be able to see these red flags, and you need to get over that hump and say, okay, I think my child needs some help.
Well, with this individual, his mother was in no shape to be doing that. Clearly,
right.
she needed some help herself. Also, the kid barely was allowed to go out by himself, we're hearing. So, who else is going to make that call?
There was clearly some poor parenting. And if the parents are sick too, well, then there's no making that call.
Now, all of this being said, though, when people say, well, we should only address the parenting and the mental health and blah, 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 blah. No, given the fact that all of those factors are leading to shootings, let's also address the gun part, because we're at a point where, because those other areas are lacking, the shootings keep happening.
Right. And apart from gun control in general. I think this woman clearly was an irresponsible gun owner, because if you are doing that properly, you can make absolutely sure, if you have a safe, that you are the only one that has access to it. And that was not the case here. These guns were probably not in any safe at all.
I think there's something else that's going on here, which is, gun control, aggressive gun control is something that we could do now, which in the short term would result in less gun violence. I'm talking about months to a year from now, a very short window of time where we would see benefits. The mental health piece is something that probably wouldn't bear fruit for a decade or more, in the sense that you would need to change the system not only to reduce the stigma in terms of getting treatment, but actually making it easier for low-income people and lower middle-class people getting treatment, affordable treatment.
Now, people might be noticing I'm not talking about the comments if those teachers had been armed. I'm not talking about that because we're going to get into that in detail with a debate next segment. So stand by for that. Guns don't kill people, people kill people. We always hear that, Lewis. I want to mention, though, that by the same token, planes don't kill people, right? People flying them into buildings do. But I remember that right after 9/11, we went right into working to keep deranged people from gaining possession of planes. And remember, it was only a handful of people that actually use planes as tools for mass murder. But we made it super difficult for the overwhelming majority of people who are peaceful and law-abiding, right? Most people who travel on planes are not going to do that, to board a plane. So that idea, guns don't kill people, people kill people, so therefore let's not regulate, I don't buy that at all.
Right, but at the same time, play the devil's advocate a little bit here. There's nothing in the Constitution about flying planes.
Fair enough. And again, for people saying the restrictions violate the Constitution, remember, the Constitution will provide that you are able to have a gun.
Through the proper channels.
Through the proper channels. Don't worry about that. That's a non-starter. Don't fall for that. A lot of irresponsible comments coming out after the fact. You may have seen that President Obama was teary-eyed and emotional in the very brief statement he gave just after the shooting took place. Take a look at this.
Who doesn't feel the same overwhelming grief that I do. The majority of those who died today were children. Beautiful little kids between the ages of 5 and 10 years old.
So the president clearly emotional there. Right away, the despicable conspiracy theories started coming. Alex Jones saying that President Obama was wiping away tears that weren't there because it's all part of the act to create situations that will make it easier to ban guns. Some people going even further, saying President Obama himself set up this shooting. There was a second shooter and that they were not taken into custody. They were there to increase the death count so that then President Obama could ban guns. I don't buy any of it. I don't buy any of it. It's irresponsible. The one piece of hypocrisy that can be pointed out is that President Obama is visibly and honestly emotional about these children that have died. But all of the people and kids that die at the hands of the drones certainly seem to be different and handled very differently. And we can't take attention away from the drone situation because it is wreaking havoc overseas in ways that are just as horrifying as these shootings.
And it's not just drones, it's the wars we're fighting in general.
Sure. So we can have that conversation, and we've had it on this program. But to go and say President Obama is fake crying and that he set up the shooting in order to be able to ban guns, we've got to back up a little bit here, Lewis, I think.
Indeed.
Also irresponsible comments coming from Mike Huckabee and Brian Fisher. Almost the same comments from both. Mike Huckabee said that Neil Cavuto asked him on Fox News, well, why didn't God stop the shooter? And Mike Huckabee said, how could you expect God to get involved when he's been kicked out of schools, essentially? Take a listen to this. This is really despicable.
Apparently people ask after tragedies like this, how could God let this happen?
Well, it's an interesting thing. We ask why there's violence in our schools, but we've systematically removed God from our schools. Should we be so surprised that schools would become a place of carnage because we've made it a place where we don't want to talk about eternity, life, what responsibility means, accountability, that we're not just going to have to be accountable to the police if they catch us, but one day we stand before a holy God in judgment.
Right. The reason that these shootings are happening are because we've somehow kicked God out of schools. Now, again,
clearly if there were a cross in one of these classrooms, the shooter would have been like, oh, you know what? Maybe I shouldn't do this. I want to be able to go to heaven. I'm just going to get out of here.
That's the thing. Not only is it absurd, but it's also not true, because just because there isn't prayer time in school, it doesn't mean that there's any ban on individual students bringing a Bible to school if that's what their parents want them to do. This is just, it's unbelievable. And Brian Fisher's saying something pretty similar again, saying God didn't go to that school because he's a gentleman and he doesn't go where he's not wanted. Essentially the same thing here.
The question's going to come up, well, where was God? I thought God cared about the little children. God protected the little children. Where was God when all this went down?
Yeah.
And here's the bottom line. God is not going to go where he's not wanted. Now, we have spent since 1962, we're 50 years into this now, we have spent 50 years telling God to get lost. Telling God we do not want you in our schools. We don't want
Again, so same idea as Mike Huckabee here. Incredible the parallels between a Republican ex-governor and one of the most extreme anti-gay voices in this country. This is, Fox News really should be pulling Mike Huckabee off the air here. I mean, even Rupert Murdoch himself tweeted we need a ban on assault weapons, but it's probably not going to happen. And somehow this is considered some kind of legitimate discussion in this country.
Yeah, it's ridiculous, the implication that without a Bible, there's no morality or anything of the sort. I don't think a little fictional novel is that powerful, sorry.
And the other thing is, we have to say this, Louis, we have to say this. If God in schools would have prevented the shootings, why hasn't God prevented all of the child molestation cases in churches, right? Because presumably God is in those churches where all those kids are being molested. I don't know. It's confusing. I just don't understand it.
Yeah, I'm seeing no traces of God anywhere, if you ask me.
Yeah. All right. I want to tell you that we have our last membership special of 2012. Here's the deal. You go to davidpakman.com/holidays. Natan, we're going to have to skip the book review, unfortunately, because we are running short on time and a lot to get to. We go to davidpakman.com/holidays. We are doing our last special of the year. You can become a David Pakman Show member and support strong alternative independent media like this show. And you get a David Pakman Show hoodie, pullover hoodie, or zip hoodie. Great deal. davidpakman.com/holidays. Please check it out. Support the show. You've been watching and listening all year. Time to support the show. Let's take a break. Incredible interviews coming up. You're not going to want to miss these. Stay tuned.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Joining me now are Larry Pratt, Executive Director of Gun Owners of America, and Lad Everett, Director of Communications from the Coalition to Stop Gun Violence. Now, gentlemen, initially we were going to have you on to talk about the Portland, Oregon shooting. Of course, over the weekend we had the shooting in Connecticut, so I think really that is going to change our discussion a little bit, although maybe less than I imagined. We'll see what you guys have to say. Larry, I want to go to you first. Do you believe we've seen anything over the weekend in Connecticut that makes you rethink what the policy should be on gun regulation, registration, and gun control and screening at all in this country?
Well, we certainly should be rethinking. We should be getting rid of the laws that have facilitated this kind of tragedy from occurring. Gun-free zones are a minor penalty compared to murder, and yet mass murder was contemplated and carried out. So it doesn't really make much sense to talk about penalizing people for having a gun in a gun-free zone when the people who are being victimized need to be able to protect themselves with a gun.
Okay, so Lad, let's pick that up, the idea that if more people in the schools were armed, that would be a better situation.
Yeah, you know, David, I think we've reached a point, and particularly after the president's remarks last night, where we need to call madness madness. And I do know of one individual who did buy into Larry's thinking in this type of, his quote-unquote solution, and that was Nancy Lanza. There is no doubt that Larry, the minute before this kid went on a rampage, would have told us that Nancy Lanza, with the literal arsenal of firearms she had in her home, was probably the safest woman in America. I think this poisonous myth that the pro-gun movement has circulated now for decades, that guns make us safer, I think that died along with those little children on Friday, sadly.
You know, we were talking about perhaps getting into Oregon. At the mall in Oregon, there was a fellow carrying a gun against the mall policy, which would have been some sort of minor infraction. When he heard the sounds of the shooter firing, he ran toward them. And as he was coming into range, the shooter saw him. That's when he committed suicide. So to say that we can just dismiss the idea that guns make us safer, I think is to miss the point that all the data we have show that where guns are more readily available, there we have less of a problem with criminals because criminals know they're going to meet quite likely effective resistance.
Is that what the data says, Lad?
No, it doesn't say that. I mean, I would encourage the people that watch your show to look at the CDC data on state gun death rates, and consistently states with weak gun laws have the highest rates of gun death. And you can look at, even states like a state like Alaska, that always predominantly has one of the highest gun death rates in the 50 states. And, states with very tough gun laws, conversely, have very low rates of gun death. Finally, playing off what Larry just said, I'll leave it up to sane Americans to think about whether having shootouts in malls with lunatics who have been legally armed or easily gained access to firearms makes them safer or not.
Well, the data absolutely do not say what you're suggesting. The FBI for years have been producing data to show that the states that have the more, that make it easier for people to have firearms, to carry firearms concealed, those are the states that have the lower violent crime rates. And the idea that somehow we would be safer in a mall waiting for somebody to come and shoot us rather than being able to fight back, if we're talking about madness, I would say that borders on madness.
Well, madness is telling people that it's okay to be waiting in a mall for someone to come and shoot them. In other modern democracies, you don't have to worry about someone coming to shoot you in a mall or in a house of worship.
You're mistaken again.
Kindergarten. No, I'm not mistaken,
You're
Larry.
mistaken
The facts
again.
are, and again,
in Europe,
I'd
they
invite
have had some of the greatest mass murders in just recent years, and in our own country, the largest mass murder at a school occurred in 1929 in Michigan, when 37 people were murdered by a guy with bombs.
Larry,
so the idea that you are going to make us safe by banning guns.
Let's take a step back for a second, guys.
Those countries have astronomically lower rates of gun death, and you know that, Larry.
Let's take a step back for a second,
We were
gentlemen,
talking
please,
about mass murders, and the fact of the matter is Europe has had at least as big a problem.
Astronomically lower rates of gun death, Larry, and you know that. And they have overall homicide rates that are also dramatically lower than ours, Larry.
If you look at Europe over the last century, my friend, they were not able to stop a mass murderer called Hitler or another one called Lenin because they didn't have the means of resisting them.
Yeah. Hold on, I think we have to wait. When we're talking about Hitler,
gun control laws, and it's crazy to suggest that somehow they have this lower rate of murder.
I think
because
we have to,
Larry.
Hold on a second, guys, if I may here. If I may, I think we have to back off of the idea.
Hey, let's have one at a time.
You're
factoring out mass murder that has occurred by their governments, facilitated, caused by, directly brought about by, and preceded by gun confiscations. That's the history of the last century in Europe.
Let me
and
pick
we don't
it up
want to
there
repeat
for a
that
second,
here.
guys. Guys, let me pick it up there for a second, if I may. Number one, I don't think that talking about World War II is relevant to talking about the mass shootings that we're having in the U.S. in 2012, first of all. But secondly, when we talk about regulation and restriction on guns, the idea of taking everyone's guns is, number one, not on the table, and number two, that's not constitutional. So no one's talking about the fear-mongering that we're seeing about, hey, if we start regulating guns, we're all of a sudden taking everyone's guns. I think that's being way blown out of proportion.
We regulate guns when we say that you can't have a gun in a mall. That is unconstitutional. That is a deadly idea, as we are finding out.
No, it's not.
And isn't it interesting that in Oregon, the mass murderer was cut very short because he saw somebody coming with a gun?
Well, Lad, I think that the Constitution talks about well-regulated, right? So the idea of having no guns in specific places, wouldn't that be part of the regulation?
Let's get back to fact and move away from conspiracy theory. When our founders debated the Second Amendment, there is existing surviving debate. Again, these things are facts, not fiction or conspiracy theory. The issue of individual self-defense was not even mentioned in those debates. Those debates, 100% of the discussion centered around military service in state militia forces. With the Second Amendment, James Madison, who was a Federalist, by the way, a man that believed that only by strengthening the federal government could we preserve our union, he was attempting to balance control of the state militia between the federal government and the states, because in the Constitution, which came before the Bill of Rights, Madison had given a great control over the militia to the federal Congress, which worried anti-federalists and people concerned about states' rights. So, all this insurrectionism coming from Larry about how he wants to arm himself against our government and shoot and kill government officials when he thinks they're tyrannical, that era ended on
Excuse
Friday.
me, James Madison was an insurrectionist. He was part of an insurrection against British tyranny.
Yeah,
and
they're
to say
gone
that
now, Larry.
somehow I'm participating in conspiracy theories when we've caught our own government in Fast and Furious supplying the Mexican cartel with the very kinds of guns you all would like to ban, I think that goes over the top.
Let's take a pause from the constitutional conversation. And I want to kind of, as we don't have unlimited time, I want to focus in very specifically on the idea of more guns in schools. Doesn't basic logic tell us that these same teachers that the American right has been calling overpaid and unqualified, becoming gun-toting security guards, can only lead to disaster, lad?
It's madness, David, and I'm not going to treat it as serious. And the people preaching it are people who hate our government, who are, preaching the kind of insurrectionist ideology that you're hearing from Larry. I'm not going to even treat it as serious anymore. Not after Friday.
Well, evidently, you don't treat self-defense seriously. To say that somehow a teacher would have been perfectly useless in stopping a mass murderer is to say that nobody should be able to defend themselves. And I think that's part of the problem, is that there's a tendency to say that self-defense is somehow unproductive or counterproductive, and it only leads to worse things happening. How worse does it have to get with 27 people dead? Surely, had somebody come barging into that classroom with a gun, that would have had a much greater chance of ending it rather than the creep running out of bullets.
Lad?
I just think it's pathetic. I mean, here Larry is. He's lobbied for years to weaken our gun laws to the point where lunatics like Jared Loughner, James Holmes, Adam Lanza can easily gain guns, often legally, because of his lobbying. And now he's telling us that because he's done that, and because he's putting us under threat every day, that we should have to bring guns into a classroom with 5- and 6-year-olds. I think that's disgusting. I think it's time to treat madness
think
like
self-defense is disgusting, then there's not much I can do to help
No,
you. But
no,
I
no,
think
Larry.
a
No,
teacher
Larry.
there
No,
with a
Larry.
gun would have been very undisgusting. It would have been disgusting only to the mass murderer. And if you're finding that disgusting, then we really have a different point of view on the world, don't we?
Oh, we certainly do.
All right. There's certainly much more that can be said. I think we've seen that people are coming at this from drastically different sides. I wonder how possibly we could ever come together on some kind of compromise on this. Hopefully the next few days, weeks, and months will give us a sense of that. I wish we had more time. We've been speaking with Larry Pratt, the Executive Director of Gun Owners of America, and Lad Everett, the Director of Communications at the Coalition to Stop Gun Violence. Gentlemen, I appreciate you being here today, even if we couldn't get much agreement.
Good to be with you.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, guys. Take care.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to The David Pakman Show.
Joining me is Margie Phelps from the Westboro Baptist Church. Immediately after the shooting at Sandy Hook School, the Westboro Baptist Church announced that it would be picketing the vigil, as well as, I believe, some of the funerals. Margie, let's cut right to the chase. What's the reason? Do you still plan to picket funerals, and what's the reason for that?
Every time God reaches down into this nation and smacks you hard and gets your attention, we're going to come forth with work. That's our job. That's our mission. So one of the ways he's doing that, increasingly, is by these shooters. They're getting younger and their numbers are getting bigger. We've told you for over 20 years that if you keep up this path of proud sin, you're going to bring mayhem to the land. And now you've waxed worse, and now you're in a fevered chase for same-sex marriage. Connecticut was one of the first states to come out with same-sex marriage. You guys think you can brute force away the standard of God. It's not going to happen. You heard it here first.
Okay, but Margie, what's the plan with the funerals specifically?
Not soon. Connecticut is going to look like a tea party. Many more shooters, many more dead are coming. And the plan with Connecticut, are you kidding me? There's already been thousands of our words put out in the airwaves. We'll continue on the course we're on. That's the plan.
Okay, but are you going to picket the funerals of the kids?
Wherever we can put these signs up, including those funerals, is what we'll do.
Okay, and specifically, I mean, I understand that you believe broadly that anything bad that happens in this country is God's punishment for what you consider to be the acceptance of homosexuality. But I mean, these kids, and we have a lot of their pictures here, I mean, what did little Jack Pinto do to deserve Jonathan Phelps there with a God sent the shooter sign, right? Or I mean, any of these, right? You know, Olivia Engel, what did she do? What's the point of being there?
Truth is, and name them all, those children are better off dead than in this nation this hour. Every child of that age in this nation outside of Westboro Baptist Church is without hope. They are on their mother's milk, taught to be proud sinners and rebels against the God of glory. There's no hope for those children.
No, that's nonsense.
Worse, they died. Look at your hands, David Pakman. Their blood is on your hands. And all the rest of the media and all the rest of the preachers and all the rest of the leaders, their blood is on your hands. If you ever cracked a Bible, you would be familiar with the fact that when you enrage the King of Glory, the Lord God Jehovah, he comes on the scene with destruction, and he's no respecter of age. He kills infants in his wrath. Furthermore, no one is born innocent. So get off all that nonsense. It's maudlin. It's unscriptural.
Yeah, Margie.
It's unhelpful at this hour. If you don't want more of those dead children, stop what you're doing.
Margie, there's been a...
If you gave a rat's backside, you or anyone else in this nation, if you really cared, Barack Obama...
We're going to have to agree to disagree on this.
Mourn for your sins.
Yeah.
You would change course before you have thousands of dead laying at your feet.
Margie, I want to... Let's...
If you agree to disagree.
No, I know the Bible stuff, but let's just try to keep it concise a little, because there are more things. Incredibly, we actually have a lot of things to talk about with you. I know that'll come as a shock to a lot of people. There have been about 200 articles.
But just to be clear, the only thing you and I are talking about today is Connecticut and same-sex marriage. Don't waste my time. You don't have a big enough audience for me to waste my time with anything else. So don't go off any rabbit trails.
No, I'm going to stick to... thank you for keeping me focused, Margie, because I want to stick to another issue, which is several hundred articles are now out about anonymous... Excuse me, Margie, let me see if we can get a question in here, if I may.
Start talking about anonymous, the irrelevant criminal cowards whose names God knows and who will let the criminal authorities deal with, then that's when I use my Skype hang-up telephone. So stick to the issue of today. The issue of today is Connecticut, dead children for same-sex marriage, and we'll continue to chat.
But have you been attacked by Anonymous?
And they're lurking in the background all the time. Anonymous is irrelevant. They're so yesterday.
Okay.
Now, meanwhile, the real issue is if you could shut us up, the Lord God will find someone else to say these words. In fact, Christ said he'll find some stones.
I know he did.
So look for the stones to start talking.
Margie, I want to... Okay.
Because God sent the shooter and he's not done.
Give me an opportunity, Margie, to talk to you one-on-one here. I against my better judgment, maybe. I want to maybe try to work out some...
David, you need us way worse than we need you, so stop all that nonsense. Anonymous is irrelevant and off the table.
Let's forget about Anonymous for a second, Margie. I'm sorry. let me just, can I make a proposal to you? Will you listen to a proposal from me? Is that, and then you can reject it or accept it. It's your choice.
Depends on what it is.
Okay. My goal is to keep you and your signs away from the funerals of these kids in Connecticut. And as you said, your goal is for as many people as possible to hear your message, which you have made a number of times on this show. So, and I may regret this, and I think my audience may not like this, but what I want to propose to you is, would you be willing to say you will stay away from the funerals of the children, and in exchange, I would provide you a 30-minute uninterrupted, it won't be me interrupting you and saying, oh, but what about this and that. We will give you 30 minutes really to put together, it can be a video that you put together or whatever you want. We'll put it on our YouTube channel, which has 25 million views. We're on 160 TV and radio stations across the country. We're on DirecTV and Dish Network in 32 million homes. I know that my audience will not like this, but I feel like I may be doing something good. I would be willing to compromise and offer you that opportunity. If you agree, simply stay away from the funerals of these few kids. And you'll reach way more people this way, which I don't like, I really don't. But I just want to see if we can maybe broker some kind of agreement.
I'll float the proposal.
Okay, so we were hoping to hear back about whether or not our proposal was accepted. There were a number of phone calls and trying to connect with them, interchange. We spoke to their public relations person. As of now, we have not gotten an answer. They're considering our proposal. I'm very hopeful that we've negotiated something here to keep them away from those funerals of those kids in Connecticut. As soon as we know more, obviously we'll present it to you, and I hope that they will do it. I think we'll have done something very good if we can just keep them away from those funerals.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome back to the David Pakman Show. Please become a David Pakman Show member made possible in part by liberalbias.com. If you're worried about liberal bias in statistics, facts, other reality-based things, unskew reality and make it easier for conservatives to handle at liberalbias.com. Today's new member of the day is Sarah Shi. I think it's pronounced Shi. It's S-H-I-H. I can't imagine any other way it would be pronounced.
I'd go with that.
Is it Shi?
I'd go with Shi.
Sarah Shi. All right. Well, Sarah, welcome and thank you. Let's talk about a couple of other things I want to get to. Susan Rice withdrew her name from consideration for Secretary of State amidst the entire controversy over the Benghazi situation. President Obama is now reportedly going to appoint John Kerry, Democratic senator from Massachusetts. He's been a guest on this show several times. Not official yet, Lewis. I actually think that this isn't good for a number of levels, on a number of levels. Number one, a woman of color who was perfectly competent and qualified for the position has been essentially forced out by Republican nonsense, Republican non-controversies. I think that is a win for Republicans in a sense.
It's a win for Republicans now. I mean, assume she were to, amidst all that, get the job anyway. Now, internationally, she's got this image possibly that other people have of her, foreign leaders have, foreigners have, because of what the Republicans have done. I mean, it's
incorrectly.
Incorrect. Yeah, it's really irresponsible overall.
Right, and also bad because now John Kerry's seat will be open for a special election. Presumably Scott Brown could again maybe work his way back into the Senate, and that's really not good. Now, the good thing about this is John Kerry is, of course, fully qualified to be Secretary of State. There should be absolutely no issue. I can't even imagine there will be any debate, barely, although I'm sure Republicans will come up with some stuff to criticize. I think that if Barney Frank decided, even though he's retiring from Congress, to run for Senate, I think he would win easily. No indication that he's going to do that. Some people thinking that maybe Ed Markey will, a congressman from Massachusetts, will run for the seat. It's just not clear at this point. If it ends up with Scott Brown back in the Senate, though, that is just bad planning.
Yes. I mean, John Kerry would make a great Secretary of State, but it is risky, this special election we're going to need to have.
Interesting story. Physicists are testing to see if the universe is a computer simulation. This is kind of like the brain in a vat idea, where what if everything is simply just an illusion simulated by electrodes hooked into brains that are just sitting in a vat somewhere. Another version of that, physicists are saying it is hypothetically possible to test the theory that the universe is all inside of a computer simulation. And the way they're going to do this is basically by, I don't even fully understand it, but my limited understanding is that if researchers build a simulation model, and then using a technique called lattice quantum chromodynamics, check how that simulation differs from what we observe and what we consider to be real life, and then extrapolate that out to see if those simulations match the universe at large, it is possible that we exist within a simulation ourselves.
And what if we do?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, that's really what we're getting to, right? Forgetting about exactly how it'll be done. Would you want to know? This is like the blue pill or the red pill in the Matrix, right?
I'd want to know how to hack it, David.
Is that right?
How can I hack it and give myself $10 billion? How can I do that?
Seriously, though, would you want to know if all of this was just a computer simulation and we had no way? Would you, knowing that, try to communicate with whoever has set up the simulation?
Yeah, I'd like to know. That'd be fascinating. I would love to know.
Marijuana has been legal for like a month in Washington State, and look at what we're already able to do. It's incredible, Louis. Mm-hmm. All right, let's go to your voicemails. Our voicemail line, 219-2-DAVID-P. Here is a voicemail from a fan of Lewis's. Let's take a listen.
Hello, this is Heather. I have several things to say. I just became a member, and I've been watching for a little while, but the thing that really drove me to join today just now was the idiot captain that called and said to David, "You suck, bro." I just say to that guy, no more milk for free. All right, buddy? Obviously, he's watching your show for free. And
right.
Just, part of the 47% that's taking advantage of you. Really, my favorite is Lewis. I'm absolutely enamored with Lewis. I'm Lewis's biggest fan, probably. And so I'm looking forward to hearing more from Lewis. And number two, on the guns and knives versus knives, just not apples and oranges, not even worth talking about in the
All right, well, yeah, some people say it is, some people say it isn't, but clearly a big fan of Lewis. Also, we've been calling for suggestions for our Best of 2012 year-end show, extravaganza, party, whatever. Anyway, here are some suggestions. Here's one interesting suggestion that came in.
Yes, this is Val in Colorado. I'm just calling to suggest something for your Best of show.
Yeah.
One time when you guys stood outside the studio with those signs that said, "Show us your panties and honk if you're gay," that was probably the funniest thing I heard all year. So I'd like to hear it on your Best of year-end show.
Yeah, there you go. I don't remember that segment, though. That's the
Never
only
happened. Don't bother yourself trying to find it. It never happened.
All right, so let's get a couple other things out on the table, Lewis. We are getting close to the end of 2012. 2012, the best year yet for the David Pakman Show. However, if you've been freeloading, if it's been milk for free, like Heather said, this is the time to sign up. We've got a great deal for you. This is the last deal of 2012. DavidPakman.com/holidays. You get the 1-year membership and your choice of a pullover hoodie or a zip-up hoodie, Lewis. Your choice of color, your choice of size, your choice of style at a great discount. We're talking about a really inexpensive way to support alternative independent media. You pay your $100 a month cable bill. You maybe watch 3 channels, Lewis. How much of that $100 is actually getting to the specific shows that you watch? Never mind the channels you watch. David Pakman Show membership is true voting with your dollars. The membership money stays 100% within the David Pakman Show. What is more democratic than that?
That's it, David. That is the perfect example of what makes this country great.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So go to davidpakman.com/holidays, sign up, the last special of the year. I hope that the last 2 weeks of 2012 will go very far to making 2013 the best year for the David Pakman Show, above and beyond 2012.
I mean, this is all assuming the 21st is not the end of the world.
Yes, let's assume, and if it is, what do you care? You signed up before the 21st and you got your name on the record as supporting the show, and then the world ended anyway. Who
That's
cares?
your legacy.
Who cares what happens? Your hoodie will be, it'll fall into a grave that will open up in the oceans or something like that. I don't know what the apocalypse
I think your scripture's a
specifically
little
will bring.
off, David.
Yeah, in any case. Maybe I'm not completely nuanced in my apocalyptic thinking. That's it for today. We'll see you tomorrow on a brand new show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.